Across Britain, frail old people are being prescribed powerful drugs originally designed to control severe mental illness. As record numbers of elderly are put into homes, World in Action asks whether it's right to subdue old people with chemical restraints.
It's the sort of thing that you give to somebody like Hannibal Lecter from Silence of Lambs, somebody who's dangerous. It's not the sort of thing that I would expect it to be given to a little old lady of 84 who's 5 foot tall, weighs 7.5 stone, and is very dodgy on her pins.
What are the most common drugs that tend to be used in nursing homes?
Merlot. They're all on Merlot.
And what does that do?
Keeps them quiet.
Does what?
Keeps them quiet. Calms them down.
Thiaridazine is abused daily throughout the country. Basically dished out as if it was a Smartie.
It's certainly the case that there's an awful lot of elderly people receiving drugs they neither need, want, or are doing them any good. So nationally, yes, we've got a serious problem.
Tonight, we reveal the extent to which some of the elderly in nursing and residential homes are being sedated with major tranquilizers they do not need. Driving through Devon is a regular activity for John Hughes. At least once a month, he makes a 600-mile round trip to see his 84-year-old mother in a residential home. She's well looked after now, but just under a year ago, John noticed a dramatic change in her behaviour.
She stopped laughing. She also stopped crying. But she also stopped being interested in anything. She was just she'd just sit there. And she was rather like the people you see in lots of old people's homes, where they sit across a room, just staring into open space.
The GP told John that she'd prescribed his mother an antipsychotic drug.
The GP told me originally that it was to stop my mother wandering, to stop her walking. And later on, when I spoke to her in July, she then said it was because my mother was distressed.
Well, I was all ready to go out for lunch.
John became alarmed when the GP diagnosed Parkinson's disease. The doctor was wrong, but Parkinson's-like symptoms are a known side effect of the drug.
I think that if the GP had visited my mother on a regular basis, this would have become apparent, and the drugs could have been withdrawn or the dose reduced or something like that. And we wouldn't have got to the situation where they were worried about Parkinson's disease. I'm very angry. For whatever reason, somebody doped my mother up for certainly the better part of 6 months, to the point where she was wasting 6 months of her life, and I wasn't having any contact with her, because there was nobody there to have contact with. The person I knew wasn't there. I was just seeing a body, a zombie. And then she came off the medication, and within a couple of weeks it was more or less back to normal. And she's still very dodgy on her pins, but we talk, we joke. And when I left last time, she cried a little bit. She was upset that I was leaving, but she'd been happy to see me. We'd had both bits.
Antipsychotic drugs were invented in the early 50s to treat schizophrenia. They revolutionized the way the illness could be controlled. The disturbing delusions of the sufferers could at last be tamed. But their powerful sedative effects meant they were easy to use as a chemical cosh.
The sorts of symptoms that you would not want to treat with these drugs are agitation, confusion, disorientation, anxiety, depression, feeling lost and anxious and clinging and importuning. All those symptoms, it is quite disastrous to treat them with these drugs. You're much more likely to create side effects.
Last year, 3 million prescriptions for antipsychotic drugs were written by doctors in England alone. Drugs like haloperidol and thiaridazine, sometimes known as Mellaril, are given mostly to old people.
there does seem to be evidence that elderly patients are given these very, very sedative major tranquilizers, they're often called, these antipsychotic drugs, not because they're suffering from any identifiable mental illness, but because it makes the patient a little bit more amenable to care, particularly if they're a bit confused or agitated. And of course, in a lot of cases, this would be totally inappropriate.
In America, legislation prohibits the abuse of chemical restraints on the elderly. Laws were passed in 1987 after Congress heard countless stories of misuse going back decades. There was public outrage, so the prescribing of these drugs is now strictly limited to patients with psychotic illness. As a result, prescribing has plummeted, improving the quality of life for the 1.5 million elderly in care. In Britain, there are no such safeguards.
I'm not a person that's a great lover of legislation to control these, because within the clinical situation there is a lot of variability that can't really adequately be controlled by legislation. But certainly I think there should be strong efforts, if legislation, if need be, to stop this, because as well as making the quality of life of these patients really zero, unbearable, a negative quality of life, there are physical effects in the long-term treatment.
A recent survey of nursing homes in South Glasgow revealed that 1/4 of the residents were on antipsychotic medication. Only 1 in 8 of the cases were being treated in line with the strict American guidelines. We went to Blackpool, where many elderly people choose to retire. We wanted to find out why many doctors give powerful drugs to frail old people and why the homes accept this. Our researcher worked undercover as an auxiliary nurse at the Manor nursing home. She got the job with no relevant qualifications or experience.
It's a good technique, that, isn't it?
That was good.
Just put one arm through there.
No references were checked, and yet the job involved caring for very frail and vulnerable people.
There. There you go.
The manor is set in a grand old house. The residents were well cared for, and entertainment was provided.
Thank you very much. And now all
But it soon became apparent that some of the old folk were not interested in sing-songs. They spent most days dozing in chairs. The nursing staff revealed that some were on powerful tranquilizers.
There is quite a lot of Meloril in it, aren't there? What's it? Because it's really a psychiatric drug, isn't it?
It's just if you get rowdy patients and people like Jenny and Amy. I mean, Amy's not so bad these days, but one time Amy was just as bad as Jenny, so they give it them over night time. It's just to calm them down. But then I always think the Merrill, you can get a build-up.
Amy's on it like every day, and then some weeks we have to just drop it off for a whole week or so, because she just gets so dopey and she just can't do anything, let alone wander. She just doesn't do nothing.
You want to sit down here, Amy?
Amy Bell was admitted to the manor 3 years ago suffering from dementia. Understandably agitated at the change in surroundings, she took to wandering. Her GP prescribed Meloril to calm her down. She no longer wanders. She's too lethargic. Her son Alan could offer no clues as to why his mother was still on this drug.
I don't see the necessity for it. If she was, I suppose, if she was violent, abusive, or, you know, sort of generally physically hard to handle, there may be a case for it. But that's not her nature at all. Absolutely not. But I try to be fair, try to look for a reason, and I can't come up with a reason. If I could, I would say, oh well, because such a thing, but frankly, I can't think of one single reason why my mother at 84 and the type of nature she has should be sedated. I can't think of one reason why that should be.
Amy isn't the only patient being prescribed Meloril. Jenny Underwood suffers from confusion and is also prone to wandering. She's on 100 milligrams a day.
Jen, it's freezing out here. Where were you going? Were you going to head down that drive? No. Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure I'm not.
It's too
But the Malarill isn't stopping her wandering.
Well, sit down, Violet. Make yourself at home.
Violet Cooper suffers from dementia and is an occasional wanderer. The doctor prescribed Malarill to be given when necessary. The manner is not unusual. An auxiliary nurse told us that the use of Malarill is commonplace in old people's homes.
Because Malarill's been prescribed, I mean, that's all doctors seem to prescribe for the elderly, to keep them calm, is Malarill. And they get build up to it. And in the end, it doesn't work, and they become aggressive. So it's like a vicious circle with it, you know what I mean? They've only got to shout 3 times and get dose of Malarill. That'll do, you know.
20% of the residents of the manor are being prescribed antipsychotic drugs. Long-term use can lead to distressing side effects, such as wide staring eyes, agitation, restlessness, confusion and drowsiness.
I'm had none.
Rhoda Blinko was admitted to the manor 4 years ago. She'd suffered a stroke and was in the early stages of senile dementia. She was already taking Malarill, but on entering the home, the dose was doubled to 50 milligrams a day. Rhoda appears to be displaying one of the more distressing side effects.
Rhoda?
She just sits there and she just goes, it's time, it's time. And she won't look at you, she just stares and a mouth, and she's like this with a mouth, all the time.
Rhoda's daughter was upset to learn that her mother was still on the drug when Rhoda's previous GP had reassured her that she wasn't.
One Sunday when we went in, she was so out of it, she just didn't want to know us at all. And I really got upset about it, so I had to go with him. And the doctor said that she was not on this medicine, that this quiet medicine they call it. And she was not on this medicine, she was only on the medication from the hospital. So I couldn't understand why she was so drugged up. And that's just what I got, she was not on it.
Dr. Krishna Gupta owns the home with his wife and helps run it. Last year he was struck off the medical register for serious professional misconduct. As the former GP of Amy and Rhoda, he'd originally prescribed them Malarill. He now seemed rather vague about the nature of the drug.
But isn't it some kind of psychiatric drug, though?
No, you don't call it, no, it's not really, it's a bit, yes. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of psychiatric. But it's not like a, you know, I just said that call like a dementia or people get aggressive or not sleeping or a bit disturbing, you know, walking about, whatever. Then we put it.
So it's quite common to put wanderers on it, is it?
Yeah.
It's not a psychiatric drug.
Right now, but it's half and half.
Right.
If more than 10 or 15% of the population of a residential home are receiving these drugs, then there really should be a major review by the doctor and the staff, nursing staff, preferably with a local community pharmacist helping them sort out who really needs these medications and who could benefit from a total withdrawal.
I think a lot of the misuse of major tranquilizers, of these antipsychotic drugs in the elderly, is not motivated by malice. It's motivated by desperation to help, but you can't do it by being physically present. There are no resources, there are no support staff, and so people revert to using chemicals to make the patient manageable because that's all they have the resources for.
Pat Tinsdale's mother Lily was given a massive overdose of an antipsychotic drug in a previous home. The error caused by lack of proper procedures had severe consequences for Lily.
When we used to go to visit her, she seemed very docile and sleepy. She was having difficulty in walking, and after about 3 months, I mean, she didn't really walk at all. She was moved from the dining room to her room or into the lounge in a wheelchair. They said, well, she'd had a chest infection not long after she'd gone into the home, and that people who had had chest infections usually deteriorated quite rapidly.
That's it, lovely. It's there now, yes.
Then Pat had a call to say that her mother had been admitted to hospital suffering from dehydration.
Not raining. No.
Her face was sort of ugly and swollen and nosy. Everything seemed much bigger than normal. So I spoke to her, and eventually she opened her eyes, looked at me and said hello. And then she just went straight back to sleep again. And I'm afraid I just burst into tears, because there's nothing worse than looking at your mother and not recognising her when you'd only seen her a couple of weeks before.
And you went shopping this morning, did you? That's what you said to me.
What Pat didn't know was that her mother's medication had been drastically increased in error.
When my mother went into the home, she was put on a fairly low dose of a 2 milligram tablet. But within 3 weeks that had been increased to 10 times as much in a day. I mean, sometimes people take a little bit too much of a drug, but my mother had been taking 10 times too much every single day for the past 2.5 months.
It all went wrong when the pharmacist issued a drug at the request of the home manager, but without a prescription from a doctor. What's worse is that 2 GPs visited Lily, wrote repeat prescriptions for this much higher dose, and completely failed to notice the effect it was having on her.
How concerned are you that these doctors did not pick this up?
We were at the time very concerned indeed, and in fact we made representation through the local representative committees to advise them of what had happened and to ensure that information was passed on to all general practitioners and all pharmacists, highlighting the problems that had occurred in this case and suggesting ways in which that could be prevented in the future.
We thought that if she'd probably taken the drug for another 2 weeks or so, she probably would have been dead. There's no other word for it.
I wouldn't defend, say, a GP who orders staff from a home to give one of these drugs with the assurance that he would write up the prescription the following day. I think the patients need to be properly assessed before these drugs are used.
With the pressures that are on GPs and the whole of the service, it's very difficult for a GP to spend a couple of hours going around one home. You know, their whole working week could be taken up just visiting residential homes. So they rely heavily on the people in charge to give them adequate information. But unfortunately, I don't believe that GPs are aware that the lack of training of the people that are in charge of some of these establishments.
Dave James has worked in several nursing and residential homes. He knows from personal experience that complications can occur with prescriptions.
A dose can be misunderstood. The actual names of some of the medication can confuse even trained people, let alone people without any knowledge. So a care assistant could quite easily, somebody who, to put it bluntly, could have been cleaning the street one day, can be giving you medication the next.
Stephen Lafferty was struck down with Alzheimer's disease in his early 40s. His wife Bridget feels the antipsychotic drugs he was given in a Devon nursing home ruined the last years of his life. Steve was on a small dose of Mellaril when he went into the home, but he was in good shape.
He was in great spirits. He walked in there and he obviously was a bit confused as to where he was going, and we had to be careful that we didn't upset him by telling him that he would be staying there for a 2-week respite. And we left him eating his lunch, basically, and chatting with some of the girls.
When Bridget went to collect Steve 13 days later, she met a very different man.
He was ashen-faced. He looked like a corpse, basically. His lips were swollen and sore, and there was thick mucus coming from his mouth. There was absolutely no response. The explanation was that Steve had been very restless and agitated and continually on the go, and he was diagnosed as suffering from exhaustion.
But Bridget discovered that in addition to the Mellaril, Steve was given a second antipsychotic, haloperidol, a drug to which he was allergic. On returning home, his GP diagnosed an overdose as a result of his adverse reaction. The medication appeared on Steve's discharge notes, but a prescription for the drug has never been found.
Had his GP been called in, of course it would have been discovered that haloperidol was not suitable for Steve. So the Mellaril with the haloperidol, I can imagine it would have a devastating effect, and so would account for Steve's behaviour. He must have been absolutely out of his mind.
Steve never recovered sufficiently for Bridget to care for him at home.
He was never the same again. I know it's a disease that, you know, the patients deteriorate very rapidly. I'm aware of that. But Steve lost a lot of quality of life, and we will never know how much he lost.
It is doctors who prescribe the drugs, but the homes can take a stand. Here at Spring Mount Residential Home in Bradford, West Yorkshire, none of the residents are taking antipsychotics, even though many have severe dementia.
The results have been startling. Over the years, we've seen people who have been very heavily sedated, withdrawn from their medication, and become so normal that visitors are often confused as to who are staff and who are residents.
Are you enjoying that dinner, Connie?
If people with dementia are given major tranquillisers, they're not able to live for the moment. They're forced into a state of withdrawal and apathy and depression. They're not able to unravel the things that are happening in their lives and to understand them. They're even less able to communicate what they're feeling to other people.
Ian's success proves that drugs are not always the solution.
I think the first thing that people need to realise in homes is if you are going to look after people with dementia, then you must not even consider using tranquilising medication. If you do, then the environment is wrong. Look to yourself and the environment you're providing for the answers to the problems, not to sedating the residents.
500,000 old people are already in care and the numbers are growing. Unless things change soon, professionals believe the future looks bleak.
First of all, doctors need to have a far greater knowledge and understanding of the problems of these drugs and to understand when to prescribe them properly. And that's a matter of national training of GPs. Secondly, and there has been some training which has been shown to be effective for residential care staff, I think all staff in residential care homes and nursing homes must receive training on how to manage difficult behaviours. They need to get confidence in it.
Life has improved for Dorothy Hughes and Lily Hand. Thanks to the intervention of their children, they're no longer being prescribed antipsychotic drugs and enjoy a good standard of care. Bridget Lafferty was not afforded that opportunity for her husband, Stephen.
At that stage, quality of life was paramount, and every day was valuable to us. And Steve had rights the same as myself, the same as anybody else. And those rights were taken away from him.
At the Manor, some of the patients' families are seriously questioning the drugs their loved ones are taking.
If she wasn't having this drug, would her quality of life be better? Now, does one answer that? I would say, as just common sense, take her off and see what happens.
As Britain's elderly population increases, more and more will spend their twilight years in homes. Sadly, many will be receiving medication they don't need.
I think it's profoundly concerning that elderly people should be kept in a zombie-like state. People go into care because they've given up living alone, and often it's a very difficult decision for them and their families. To then have that last piece of life spent in a drugged-up state seems quite wicked.